just extend my appreciation to those who've helped put this case together, with Byron and Joelle and the other who've helped, and also our water keepers and those who fought to educate about the lake and who have prayed for our lake. We want to thank our Creator for a beautiful day today and for blessing our nations and blessing our people. Bonjour, I bid you good day. Ogimama Kodesh Nakas Gaganush Diabdunji. Banasi Dudem. I'm the Grand Chief for the Southern Chiefs Organization and proud citizen of Long Plain First Nation. I'm honored to be the Grand Chief, and the Southern Chiefs Organization represents 33 Anishinaabe and Dakota nations, more than 87,000 citizens in the territory now known as Southern Manitoba. Today we are making history. The Government of Manitoba and Manitoba Hydro has not protected Wiinibi Ki Segegan, also known as Lake Winnipeg. As First Nation people, it is our responsibility to protect the water. Today, the Southern Chiefs Organization and 4 of our relatives filed a statement of claim at the Court of King's Bench. We are launching a charter challenge, an unprecedented move in Canada to have Lake Winnipeg declared a living entity, with all the rights and protections that entails. With me today at the table is Chief Lisa Young of Bloodvein First Nation, and 2 lead plaintiffs, Elder Emery Stagg of Dauphin River First Nation, knowledge keeper and environmental scientist, Taylor Gavin of Broken Head Ojibwe Nation. And our lawyers, Byron Williams and Joelle Pastora Sala of the Public Interest Law Center. I'd also like to recognize that Councillor Randall Roulette from Sandy Bay First Nation and Councillor Ryan Anderson from Dauphin River First Nation are with us here on behalf of their chiefs and nations. Manitoba Hydro and the Government of Manitoba have artificially controlled the water levels and the outflow of Lake Winnipeg for nearly 50 years. Most Manitobans will be stunned to know that in almost 50 years of operations of Lake Winnipeg, Manitoba Hydro has never been required to conduct an environmental assessment to properly analyze the impact of its operations on the lake. It is simply irresponsible. Wetlands are in decline. Fish are sick. Invasive species have arrived, and First Nations are denied inherent Indigenous and treaty rights. Who has benefited? Manitoba Hydro makes billions of dollars a year in revenue. We are demanding an environmental assessment begin immediately with First Nations at the table. The impact is real, and they are dire. It is becoming increasingly difficult to harvest food and traditional medicines. It's time to make things right and to fight for this existential threat to Lake Winnipeg. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Young, followed by Elder Stagg and environmentalist Taylor Gavin. Then we will take questions from the media.
Good morning, everyone. As you heard, Lake Winnipeg has a living spirit and is living. You have heard that she is sick and that Lake Winnipeg regulation and fundamentally interfere with her natural flows and water levels. Manitoba Hydro is seeking a new 50-year license for Lake Winnipeg regulations to begin in 2026, and there has never been an environmental assessment of the impacts of Lake Winnipeg regulations. This case has 3 objectives. 1, recognition that living being with spirit, Lake Winnipeg has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person under Section 7 of the Charter. Number 2, finding that by interfering with the natural flows and levels of Lake Winnipeg without benefit of environmental assessment, Manitoba and Manitoba Hydro have violated the rights of the lake and of the First Nation citizens who rely on her and who live in relation with the lake. Number 3, that there must be a public hearing and environmental assessment to consider Manitoba Hydro's application for the new 50-year license for Lake Winnipeg regulation. Lake Winnipeg must have its own voice in that public hearing. Thank you.
River, knowledge keeper, commercial fisherman. And I've lived on Lake Winnipeg all my life. And before the first hydro project happened, I could drink water from Lake Winnipeg. I could eat the fish from Lake Winnipeg. I could find medicine from Lake Winnipeg. I could eat moose, other animals that drink Lake Winnipeg water. I could swim in Lake Winnipeg. I could drive my boat around in Lake Winnipeg. I would never run out of water. Today, the lake is dying. I can't do what I just mentioned anymore. And we need that lake to be cleaned up because we need it for sustenance. Like I say, I've lived there all my life. I have grandchildren. And they won't have that experience I had with Lake Winnipeg when I was young to today. And it's sad to see how Lake Winnipeg is being used for the dollar figure. But we need to stand up for our rights because water, you need water to make life. And if the water's dead, all living things will die. So I would encourage governments, hydro, to do a proper environmental assessment, but to include our culture, our way of life, when they discuss these licenses on how to control water. And 2011 flood is an example of what water does when it's not regulated properly. Our community was shut down for 10 years, and we wanted to go home, but everything was destroyed in 2011. We still haven't recovered from that disaster. So that's why Dauphin River wants to be at the table on how to manage Lake Winnipeg, because that's where the water from portage diversion through Lake Manitoba, through Lake St. Martin, ends up in Lake Winnipeg by our community of Dauphin River. We're basically the plug in the bathtub scenario. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So my name is Taylor Galvin for Broken Head, but I'm also a graduate student at the University of Manitoba looking at traditional storytelling and oral traditions in the protection and conservation of sturgeon populations, which has been very much impacted by things like Manitoba Hydro in particular. But first and foremost, I think what needs to be acknowledged here is not us and our voices, but that of the spirit and the livelihood of Lake Winnipeg herself. So this morning, before coming here, I'm very honored to be able to live in my community so close to Lake Winnipeg that I went and offered tobacco to the lake, and she granted me the permission of bringing her here, because if we're going to be speaking on behalf of something so important as the water, that water needs to be present in every step of the way in order to guide us and bring that spiritual teachings that we otherwise can't actually address, not having her here with us. And so I'd like to acknowledge Lake Winnipeg for being here as well and being present throughout this journey with us. When I was approached to ask to be a part of this, I I was a little hesitant at first because I needed to go and ask the lake if this was the work that I needed to do and if I was the right person to do that. And so I was very honored when I was gifted the ability to be able to speak in her protection and walk alongside her for many years. I spend every single morning of every season with Lake Winnipeg, and so I see firsthand the impacts and how rapidly she can change from day to day, and it can be quite disturbing to see how fast the water fluctuates, how the quality of the water changes per season, per year, the new species that are introduced, those that are invasive, those that are displaced and otherwise. And so I'm very honored to be here today to speak with everybody and to speak for the protection of Lake Winnipeg, a body of water so grand that it encompasses so much of our province, that yet we seem to think that we can take and take without giving anything in return, and that's what led us here in the first place. We forgot to look back at those original instructions gifted to us from Kitchi Manitou, which is never take without giving something in return. And so we need to bring back that spiritual connection, that ceremonial perspective of how we actually lived in harmony and in balance with Lake Winnipeg for hundreds, if not thousands of years before things like industry impacted her so vastly. And so with that, I'd just like to say Kitchi Miigwech for giving me the time and the opportunity to speak. And I hope that moving forward, her voice becomes much louder than ours ever will. Miigwech.
With that, we'll take any questions from the media at this time. And please, if they're directed to anyone, please maybe just say who you would like to answer them, and then we'll move your mic around for you.
Let's ask one at a time, okay? Put your hands up.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Miigwech, Chief,
Yeah.
Elders, Water Keepers, thank you. My question, I think, is for the Chief and for whomever else wants to talk about this, but as I understand, and as I read the suit, that this is based also in international law, that we have seen in New Zealand, the Amazon, in Quebec, that courts have recognized internationally the water, and in this case, Lake Winnipeg, her spirits, but who speaks for Lake Winnipeg? And I see some people here that speak on her behalf, and that this has been recognized internationally. And in that way, I see this as being significant internationally as well. And I just want you to talk about that, because I think Lake Winnipeg, sometimes here we take her for granted. And I think what I'm hearing here today is that you're asking a court to give her standing, and that while we've spent a lot of time talking about the city of Winnipeg and sewage treatment, et cetera, there's been very little conversations over the years about the successive Manitoba governments in trying to safeguard the lake, and what Manitoba Hydro has done. And so the failure of others, you're basically saying today, we're going to speak on her behalf, and we would like a judge to basically recognize what has been recognized internationally in other entities and other waters. So talk about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think that we're wanting to ensure that, the charter rights are going to be applied to the lake, and so with the way things are being done right now, with the environmental assessment not being done for the last 50 years, there's been a lot of sort of pushing the ball down the court and not dealing with some very important parts of sustaining the lake. When the treaties were signed and we talked about, that for as long as the grass grows, the waters flow and the sun shines, it meant that we need to look after the land in perpetuity. And so we have a shared responsibility. Those who have came here, including us, have a shared responsibility that the lake is sustainable forever. And so when there's risk to the lake and we're not assessing those risks properly, then we have to look at what we can do to change that. And so we've seen international precedents set in different countries around the world, and we think we can do a Canadian or Manitoba solution. to how we work with our environment, and in this case, Lake Winnipeg.
And I'm not sure who can comment on this, but I look at the Netley Marsh and how it's being compared as kind of the kidneys of the lake, and how water, flows and how that fluctuates. But you've all said kind of your relationship with the lake, and I'm just wondering if you can expand upon that, what you've seen maybe as a child and what you've seen now, and kind of why you have stepped forward, because it's so very important here that you're speaking on behalf of the lake, and you want ultimately a court to decide that the lake gets to speak for itself.
So I think you might have missed it because you walked in a little late,
Yeah,
but
my apologies.
Emery Stagg here had made those comments
Yeah.
about when he was very young and how he drank from the water, and how now, even boating on the lake, you have to slow down. So there's lots of challenges with what we're seeing today. The fish are being affected by this. Even the spawning of the fish are being affected by this. We're seeing less spawning happen, and so and that's the challenge. They haven't done an environmental assessment for 50 years, and the environmental assessment in itself may not even be what we require. With new knowledge and understanding of, especially with the Indigenous knowledge now being accepted within the scientific community as something that is completely valid within the assessment, the reasoning. It's important that we think about how environmental assessments are done, and that First Nations are at the table when it comes to licensing and regulating the lake.
My last question has to do
We'll
with,
just
my
move-
apologies.
That's okay, we'll just see if anyone else
Yeah.
has questions right now, and then we can.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm not sure, is this the first instance in Canada of a suit calling for, say like a body of water or, forest, to have charter rights? Do you know if this is the first of its kind?
I think it is the first of its kind. I think that's the appropriate way to deal with how we relate to the land. We have to think about ourselves in that lake, or as that lake is in ourselves. And we always hear statements about how we're composed of water, that we're of the water in many ways. And we do come from that. And so in this instance, that's the case. But we need to get to a point where the Lake Winnipeg is being respected and treated the way it should be.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Was there like a tipping point that brought you guys to the decision to make this claim, or because you're talking about a lot of these issues that were sort of piling up, was there sort of a final straw where you decided this is what we need to do?
We've been working on it for a number of years, and we've known that the lake has been a challenge for a very long time. I mean, we saw the massive spill, I think, in 2011, and where, the pipe spill, the sewage spill. We've seen another one recently. But in addition to that, there's just high nutrient loads going into the lake aside from that. And so we need to create a governing structure for the lake that is going to maintain it in perpetuity. And we need to be able to monitor that. We need to understand the impacts that these nutrient loads have, and we need to look at what is the best possible scenario that we can create for ourselves as humanity to govern ourselves correctly as it relates to the lake.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. My understanding is that Manitoba Hydro is up for a license renewal of the project in the lake.
Yeah.
That will see this extended another 50 years. What is the sense of urgency here as they're up for this renewal?
Well, we would definitely be disputing that with this case. We think that the current regime as it stands right now is unacceptable.
And what have communications with Hydro been like so far?
I think they've been not so well, not so good.
Anyone else? Richard?
Chief, what do you say then about successive Manitoba governments and the behavior of successive Manitoba hydros towards the lake? Because they essentially have carte blanche when it comes to
I think
the lake.
completely negligent, and there needs to be considerations of beyond just the lake, the marshlands, the rivers, and the impact of the land itself. Those kinds of things need to be considered in any of the development that we do. If we want to sustain ourselves within this region for for, you know, for as long as the grass grows, the rivers flow, and the sun shines, then we need to be able to get it right so that that entity is going to continue on in perpetuity forever, is basically what we're saying.
Grand Chief, why the federal government and the city of Winnipeg not named in this?
Because they're not involved in the regulation of the lake right now, as it is. And that might be another question. And this is, we're not saying this is going to solve everything, but we think this is going to be a good start to changing the way people think about the way the lake's governed.
Is SCO collaborating with or consulting other groups that have achieved personhood for bodies of water like Lake Winnipeg? You know that there's a group, Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective, I believe, that's also advocating for this. I guess what's the scope of the collaboration?
I think we've been very focused on, you know, what we've filed, and we've been very focused on ensuring that the lake itself and our opponents here have you know, been fully prepared for this case. And like I said, it's been a 3-year process to get us to this point.
Anyone else? Questions?
You kind of touched on it, but I'm just, you know, what's your hope for the end game of this claim here? Like, are you just hoping to have the lake sort of have more of a voice in hydro negotiations? Is there a way forward, or what's your ideal outcome of this?
There's probably going to have to be a change to the way environmental assessments are done. We might need environmental assessments that are ongoing and are not 50 years. You know, we're probably going to need them on a sporadic, random basis. We currently do water testing at our communities, sort of water runoffs, and also where the water, our drinking water. And we create a base. We've been creating a baseline for water quality. So that's some of it. But in the larger scale, we need to create a different sort of, I think, environmental assessments process, and we need to create just the governing of the lake right now, the licensing, all of that needs to sort of be modernized to reflect the charter rights of, if the lake was to be recognized in that way, it would have to reflect that.
I know it's very early on, but, you know, I'm curious to know, you know, as this was put into practice, you know, what would it look like for Lake Winnipeg to have charter rights? What do you think, you know, if there was a violation of these rights, what the process would be?
We'll have to establish sort of all the different aspects for what would be a charter, what a living entity as a human being. What would be an infringement on your rights as a human being? So if we consider the lake as a living entity, you would create all of those, a list of that. It'll create sort of a whole new discourse around law in Canada, and that'll help, I think, with how governance for the lake is going to be structured going forward.
There's going to be a lot of questions around this when people hear about this in newscasts and
Yeah.
news. Can you just describe, you know, kind of exactly what you're looking for? I know that we're talking about personhood for the lake,
Yeah.
and her ability to have charter rights.
Yeah.
Are you at all, you know, looking for Manitoba Hydro to leave that area, or what are the expectations there?
Well, I think that we want to make sure that the lake is protected. If that includes, you know, different aspects to what it's going to take to get us there, then we're prepared to go that way. You know, but I don't think there's a finality on where we're planning to go. I think that what we want is we want the lake to protect it so that it can sustain forever. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for coming. Does anybody need to get cut otherwise? Maybe we'll just ask you guys to sit for a second. You're good? Okay. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.